My name is Loretta Hawkins. I'm 71 years old, and for most of my life, I was Malcolm's wife. Never CEO, never shareholder on paper, just his wife. I was the woman behind the man behind an $82 million empire called Hawkins Timber. I raised our son, baked biscuits from scratch, and hosted every Thanksgiving for 38 years. Until this year. This year, I sat at the head of a table I no longer owned, in a home I had once designed down to the crown molding, and waited to be humiliated over stuffing and wine. The room was glowing with soft chandeliers, the kind that made betrayal feel like theater. Across from me sat my son, Andrew, in a tailored suit I didn't recognize. Beside him, his wife, Chloe. Sharp lipstick, sharper smile. She stood up, champagne flute in hand, and with the poise of a woman who'd practiced this line in the mirror all morning, she said, "We've decided to cut you off this family. Not, we're worried about you. Not, we think you need help. Just cut you off, like I was a spoiled ribbon at the end of a gift they'd long outgrown." Andrew didn't even flinch. He kept his eyes on his plate, like if he didn't meet mine, he could pretend he hadn't heard. The cousins shifted in their seats. My grandkids paused mid-chew. Even the golden retriever looked up from the floor. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. I slowly reached down beside me. No rush. No drama. Pulled out a cream-colored envelope from my leather bag, stitched by hand, gift from my husband on our 40th anniversary. I placed it gently next to the pumpkin pie, then looked around the table. "Here's something for all of you," I said, voice steady. "One last thing from the woman who funded your lives." I nodded to Chloe. "Go ahead. Open it." She smirked like I'd handed her a birthday card, tore it open with 2 manicured fingers. The moment her eyes landed on the top line, her smile disappeared. Andrew leaned over. His face paled as he read the header. "Dissolution and redistribution of the Hawkins Family Trust. Effective immediately." Inside that envelope was the legal confirmation that, as of 9 a.m. that morning, the $82 million trust fund, which they all believed would finance their comfort for generations, had been dissolved. Legally. Irrevocably. By me. The estate, no longer theirs. The company shares, reallocated. The Aspen Chalet, the luxury SUV, the kids' private school tuition, the golf club memberships, gone. One signature, one pen, one old woman they thought would stay quiet forever. Chloe's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Andrew finally looked up. What have you done?" I lifted my water glass. Not wine. I haven't drunk wine since Malcolm passed. He always said he wanted one of us sober enough to remember what people said. "I did what your father asked me to do. If the day ever came when you forgot who built this." Someone dropped a fork. Someone else cursed under their breath. My grandson, bless his teenage honesty, whispered, "What does it mean?" I smiled gently. "It means your parents just realized dessert was the last sweet thing they'll be tasting for a while. No one finished their pie. No one asked me to stay for coffee. And that was the last Thanksgiving I ever attended in that house. But before I left, I looked at each of them, and I remembered every night I stayed up baking pies while Malcolm worked late. Every document I typed, every contract I reviewed behind the scenes, every school tuition I paid quietly, every dental bill, every emergency fund. I remembered being invisible. And I remembered that some ghosts come back, not to haunt, but to remind people they were once real. I was once real. And that night, I became undeniable. They say success has many fathers, But failure? That one's always an orphan. I used to believe I was neither. After I left that Thanksgiving dinner, I didn't go home right away. I drove around for a while, ended up in front of a building I hadn't visited in years, the original Hawkins timber mill. It's just a parking lot now, but I remember when it was nothing more than a shack with 2 saws, 1 generator, and my husband, Malcolm. Malcolm Hawkins was never the loudest man in the room, but when he spoke, people listened. He had that kind of presence, calm, commanding, patient, the kind that made men follow, the kind that made me believe in him before there was anything to believe in. I was 24, a school teacher. He was 27, a dreamer with dirt on his boots and plans no one else could see. He didn't propose with a ring. He handed me a folded paper, a timber license, said, "This is the start of our life, Loretta, not just a business, a life." And I said yes, to him, to the papers, to everything that would come next. I quit teaching 2 months later. At first, I did the payroll because we couldn't afford an accountant. Then I ran the books, filed the permits, negotiated small contracts. When we needed a secretary, I became one. When we needed an office manager, I stepped in. No title, no paycheck, no complaints. I still remember typing our first real partnership agreement on a rickety typewriter in a cold trailer, 8 months pregnant with Andrew. Malcolm stood behind me, hand on my shoulder, whispering, "We're building something no one can take from us." But they could, and eventually, they did. See, in those days, wives didn't ask to be on legal documents. They didn't demand board seats or equity stakes. We signed where they told us to. We showed up to events in modest heels and thanked people for coming, even when we paid for the drinks. My name wasn't on the company's founding charter, but I wrote the first company brochure. I answered phones when we had no receptionist. I baked pies for the crew when Malcolm wanted to boost morale after a tough month. And when storms hit, I was the one sitting up, with him at 2 a.m., brainstorming how to keep payroll going without laying off a single man. That's what partnership looked like. Back then, quiet, invisible, but real. By the time Hawkins Timber hit its first million in profit, Andrew was 6 years old. Chloe wasn't even in the picture. We bought the big house up on Briar Hill. Malcolm said, "This place is for you, Loretta. You made it possible." But the deed had only his name. I never asked why. I just accepted it. That was my biggest mistake. Not the silence. The acceptance. Years passed. The company grew. And slowly, my role faded. First, they hired real accountants, then real lawyers, then someone else to organize events. By the time Malcolm retired, I was no longer needed. Not at the office. Not even at the boardroom dinners. But I didn't mind, because we had each other, and we had built something that would carry our family for generations. That was enough, until Malcolm died. And suddenly, all that I had given turned into something they acted like I had taken. I became the woman who used to be useful, a relic, a side note, a placeholder in photo albums. But I never forgot. Not the scent of pine in Malcolm's hair after a day in the field. Not the feeling of signing contracts with my husband beside me, my fingers shaking from the cold and the gravity of it all. Not the nights we ate peanut butter sandwiches on folding chairs because the electricity had been cut and we couldn't pay the bill. I remembered everything, even if no one else did. So when I sat at that Thanksgiving table and watched Chloe try to erase me with one sentence, I didn't flinch. Because while they had comfort, I had memory. And in that memory lived every ounce of my share of that fortune. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. But what they never understood was some foundations don't crack. They carry the weight. And wait until it's time to remind the house exactly what it's standing on. The day we buried Malcolm, the sun came out too bright. It was late spring, but the air had that cruel crispness that makes you feel like winter's still hiding in the ground. The kind of cold that doesn't touch your skin, but your bones. Maybe that's why I didn't cry. Or maybe, somewhere deep down, I already knew there wasn't space for my grief. The service was held at St. Alden's Chapel. Chloe insisted. "It's where important families go," she said, like we were booking a conference venue, not saying goodbye to the man I built my life with. There were over 200 people in attendance. CEOs, politicians, donors, distant cousins we hadn't seen since the last election cycle. Rows of black suits and designer sunglasses. Everyone looked polished, brushed, practiced, except me. I wore Malcolm's favorite navy coat. The one he said made me look like a woman who could run a country and still make chicken pot pie. I held my purse tighter than usual, not out of nerves, but habit. I've always clung to something when I'm about to lose everything. Andrew stood at the podium, straight back, shoulders proud, a perfect air. He began, "My father was a man of vision, of purpose, a builder, not just of timber, but of legacy. Hawkins Timber stands today as a monument to his foresight and discipline." He went on like that. Legacy, growth, innovation, generational success. He mentioned every boardroom Malcolm ever sat in, every award, every expansion deal. He listed every achievement like bullet points on a resume, but not once did he say husband. Not once did he say my mother. I sat in the front row, alone. My hands rested in my lap, my jaw set like stone. And though my eyes stayed dry, my fingers gripped the purse strap so hard I left dents in the leather. No one noticed. Chloe sat beside Andrew, dabbing the corner of her eye with a linen handkerchief. People would remember that image. The devoted daughter-in-law, gracious in grief. But grief doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes in silence. Sometimes it comes in sitting there, listening to your whole life be erased in front of a crowd by your own child. After the service, guests came to shake my hand. He was a giant. Such a brilliant strategist. You must be proud. Proud. What a strange word to offer a woman who just watched her husband's life be converted into a corporate eulogy. Someone, I don't even remember who, leaned in and said, "He left quite a kingdom behind. You'll be well taken care of." I almost laughed, as if I was the widow of a king, waiting for the crown to trickle down. As if I hadn't stood beside Malcolm during the lean years, cutting coupons while he pitched clients. As if I hadn't typed the memos, packed the lunches, paid the bills when payroll came late. Taken care of? I wasn't a pet. I was a partner. But I didn't say that. I just nodded and folded my hands tighter in my lap. After the crowd thinned, I stood alone by Malcolm's casket. The flowers were all wrong. Too white, too clean, too staged. I reached into my purse and pulled out the brooch he gave me on our 40th anniversary. The one shaped like a maple leaf, just like the trees lining the old mill. I pinned it to the inside of his lapel, tucked where no one else would see. You were never the brand, Malcolm. You were the roots, and I was the soil. I whispered it so softly, I barely heard myself. And then I walked away. Not broken, not healed, just changed. Because something inside me knew. If this was how they honored the man who built the fortune, I had better be ready for how they'd treat the woman who kept it standing. I lasted exactly 11 days in the big house after Malcolm's funeral. On the 12th morning, Chloe showed up with a clipboard and a neutral smile. "Hi, Loretta. I hope you slept okay. We thought today would be a good day to start fresh. Clean out the things you no longer need. Give the space some breathing room." She didn't ask. She scheduled. By noon, she had a team of 2 young organizers, neither older than Lily, packing my books, my sweaters, my framed needlework into neat labeled boxes. Mother-in-law's memorabilia, guest kitchen items, vintage bedding. Vintage. That word stung worse than antique. At least antique meant worth something. I watched as one of the girls picked up the silver-framed photo of Malcolm and me from our anniversary trip to Bar Harbor. She held it up and asked, "Trash or storage?" I didn't answer. I just walked over, took it from her hand, and placed it inside my purse. The same purse I had squeezed tight during Malcolm's eulogy. It was becoming a storage unit for what little I had left. Chloe's voice floated down the hall. "We've prepared the garden house for you. It's cozy and has everything you need." Lily even picked out the curtains. The garden house. That's what they called the converted pool house in the backyard. It used to hold garden tools and broken lawn chairs. Now, it held me. I moved in before sunset. The room smelled like fresh paint and lavender air freshener. The bed was soft, but not familiar. There was a kitchenette, a twin sofa, a bathroom without a bathtub, and one narrow window that faced away from the main house. I was no longer part of the home. I was the shadow of it. That night, Andrew didn't come to check in. Lily dropped off a welcome basket, bath salts, crackers, 2 tea bags. She gave me a quiet hug and whispered, "I didn't know they were doing this." I patted her hand and told her I was fine. Then I closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, hands on my lap, shoes still on. It's a strange thing to live just 30 feet from a life you helped build and not be welcome inside it. In the weeks that followed, my name disappeared from everything. I wasn't invited to company dinners. Didn't receive meeting minutes from the Hawkins Timber Board. Carla, the lawyer, wasn't returning my calls. Apparently, Chloe had instructed the legal team to streamline internal communications. I had gone from being Mom and Mrs. Hawkins to just Loretta, the woman in the garden house, the liability with a last name. I heard them laughing on the patio one night, wine glasses clinking. Chloe said something about how Mother Loretta's enjoying her little retreat. And Andrew laughed. He laughed. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. No sound but the soft hum of the fridge and my own heartbeat. Steady, but growing heavier. They didn't take everything. Not yet. Because while they removed me from their house, they hadn't removed me from the trust, and they hadn't removed me from my memory. There's a particular cruelty in watching someone repurpose your life, paint over it, stage it, rename it, then hand you a cup of tea like you should be, grateful. But I wasn't angry. Not then. I was, noting. Every gesture, every shift in tone, every missing invitation, every closed door. I was being erased, yes, but I was still holding the pen, and somewhere deep inside me, a page had begun to turn. Some betrayals don't start with shouting. They begin with teacups. Every afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock, Chloe would bring down a tray to the garden house. 2 china cups, 1 silver teapot, 2 shortbread cookies placed diagonally on a napkin. She made it seem like a gesture of care, a ritual between women. as if we were equals, having a little moment. I used to wonder if she measured the sugar to appear kind but not warm. 1.5 teaspoons. Always. Never more. Never less. She never asked how I liked it. I'd open the door before she could knock, sit down in the armchair across from her. Let her pour. Let her control the tempo, the tone. She talked about Lily's exams, about Andrew's schedule, about weather, flowers, real estate markets, never once asked about how I was feeling. Not really. I responded politely, nodded, smiled, the way I had been taught, the way women of my generation were expected to. Stay gracious, my mother used to say, even when they hand you a knife wrapped in lace. But that afternoon, something shifted. It was raining lightly, and Chloe had her phone propped up against her purse. She forgot to silence it. A video call came in. FaceTime. She answered it mid-sip, keeping her eyes on me but whispering into the mic, "Yes, just checking in on her. Garden house tea time. Keep her busy with tea and slippers. She'll fade soon." She didn't realize the sound was still on. She didn't know I could hear every word. Fade soon. I looked down at the cup in my hand. It was the fine china Malcolm and I bought in Maine. We had picked the pattern together. Blue cornflowers on white ceramic. I remember we laughed that day. He said, "Let's choose something timeless, something we'll still be sipping from when we're old and grumpy." I was sipping from it now. Alone. Not grumpy. Not old. Just discarded. I didn't say a word. I didn't flinch. I raised my cup and took a sip, eyes meeting hers. She smiled, unaware, or pretending to be. The moment passed. She tucked the phone away, resumed her monologue about curtains for the winter guest room. I nodded when expected, gave the obligatory at all the right moments. But something inside me had cracked, and cracks have a funny way of letting truth leak through. That night, I sat in bed with the teacup on the nightstand. I stared at it for a long time. The blue cornflowers, the memory of Malcolm's hand brushing mine across the porcelain shelf, and her voice echoing in my ears. She'll fade soon. People think cruelty always looks loud. Red-faced, slamming doors, harsh words. But the worst kind is quiet, coated in sugar, served in porcelain. The next morning, I declined tea. Told Chloe I had a headache. She offered to bring chamomile. I said no. That night, I took out a notebook, drew a line down the middle. Left side, what they've taken. Right side, what I still have. The left filled quickly. The house, the seat at the board, the title, the invitations, the photo albums, the kitchen, the garden. The right took longer, but slowly the list grew. My name, my memory, my legal rights, at least the ones Malcolm had quietly left behind, and most of all, time. They thought time was on their side because I was older, but what they didn't know, what Chloe couldn't see from behind her wine glass and lipstick, was that I didn't need decades. I just needed clarity and one clean opportunity. The next morning, I walked the long path around the main house. My knees ached, but I didn't stop. I made it to the library. Malcolm's old study still smelled like cedar and ambition. I opened the bottom drawer, found the manila folder with our original estate documents, Malcolm's handwriting in the margins. He had trusted me, not just with love, but with legacy. And Chloe was wrong. I wouldn't fade. I would return, but not to the house, to the truth. There was a rhythm to that house, the Hawkins estate. Even in silence, it hummed with decisions made in polished hallways and signed in hidden rooms. But some doors were built not for noise, but for legacy. I waited until the house was empty. Chloe had taken Lily to ballet. Andrew was at the board meeting he hadn't invited me to. The staff rotated shifts between the main house and the garden house. No one noticed when I took the old hallway toward Malcolm's study. My knees didn't like the carpeted stairs, but I made it. The key was still behind the painting of the old forest mill, exactly where he used to keep it, exactly where he said I'd find it, if you ever need to remind them who we were. I hadn't dared open that safe since the funeral. But that day, after Chloe's words about fading, after the sugar-laced exile I'd been served in china cups, I felt something shift. I needed to remember who I had been, before the slippers, before the soft erasure. The combination clicked. Left, right, left, like he taught me. Same rhythm he used when tying his shoelaces. 3 knots, always neat. The safe door opened with a long, patient groan. Inside, a worn envelope, a sealed leather folder, and a single cufflink, his favorite, the one shaped like a hawk. I sat on the velvet bench by the window. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from knowing. I opened the envelope first. The letter was short, barely half a page. Loretta, if Andrew forgets who built all this, remind him. If Chloe tries to recast your silence as weakness, open the folder. You were never just the quiet one. You were the reason. The $82 million trust is yours to dissolve. Do it if they forget your name. Do it for your dignity, not revenge. Love, Malcolm. My breath caught, not because of the money, because he knew. He saw this coming. And somehow, even from the grave, Malcolm had left me the one thing no one else had offered since he passed: acknowledgement. He knew what they would try, how they'd smile while slicing me out of the frame. He knew they'd try to turn my decades of loyalty into a soft blur in family memory. He hadn't left me power. He left me a choice. I placed the letter on my lap and opened the leather folder. Inside, notarized amendments, documents bearing his signature and mine. Co-trusteeship of the Hawkins Trust. Language clear as day. Either party may unilaterally dissolve the fund in the absence of mutual consent if one party is deceased. I could dissolve it. $82 million. Earmarked for generational leadership. They thought it was theirs, entitled by blood, cemented by assumption. They never imagined I could touch it. I closed the folder slowly, and I laughed, not loudly, not bitterly. It was the kind of laugh that slips out when the soul finally exhales, a sound only the walls of that study would ever hear. The irony? I never wanted to dismantle it. That trust fund was meant to keep the company alive for generations, to protect our legacy. But now I understood. It was also Malcolm's way of saying, if they no longer respect the foundation, let the building fall. I tucked the folder back into the safe, not out of fear, out of patience. Because power, when real, doesn't rush. It waits. It observes. And it speaks only when the silence becomes deafening. I locked the safe again, slid the painting back into place. I walked out into the sunlight, past the hedge roses Chloe had planted too close together, past the statue Andrew had moved to face the driveway instead of the garden, as if everything had to face outwards now, never inward. Back in the garden house, I boiled water, made tea, this time for myself. And for the first time in weeks, it tasted like mine. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not Chloe, not Andrew, not even my lawyer. Yet, some truths are best savored slowly. Let steep, let brew. I would wait until the right moment. Until the next family dinner. Until the next time Chloe smiled too tightly. Until Andrew raised a glass to vision. Then, Then I would pour something stronger than tea. The next morning, I made a phone call I never thought I'd make again. Carla Bentham, Malcolm's lawyer for over 30 years, sharp as a scalpel, discreet as snowfall, and loyal to no one but the law. She hadn't been around since the funeral. Chloe said she was too old-fashioned. Andrew preferred a younger firm, one with more agility. But I remembered what Malcolm always said about Carla. She's the only one who'll tell you the truth, even if it burns. She answered on the second ring. "Loretta Hawkins," she said, her voice crisp as always. "I was wondering when you'd call." Not Loretta. Mrs. Hawkins. The only person left who still used my full name, like it meant something. "Would you mind stopping by?" I asked. Carla didn't ask questions. She never did over the phone. "I'll be there at 3. At 2:59, a dark sedan pulled up outside the garden house. Carla stepped out in her navy pantsuit, her silver hair twisted neatly into a chignon. She walked with purpose, her briefcase swinging like a metronome. She didn't comment on the size of the house, didn't glance at the modest furniture or the fact that I poured tea from a ceramic pot instead of the silver one she used to see at the main estate. Instead, she sat across from me and opened her notebook. "Tell me everything." I handed her the envelope and folder from the safe. She read every word, quietly, eyes scanning each line like scripture. Then she closed the folder, set it down, and looked straight at me. "Do you know what this means?" she asked. I nodded slowly. Malcolm gave me full authority to dissolve the trust. She tilted her head. "Not just that. You can rewrite everything. The estate plan, the shareholding structure, even the bylaws of the family foundation. If you wanted to, you could erase every name off those documents but your own." I stirred my tea. The sugar didn't dissolve. "And if I don't want revenge?" I asked. Carla didn't flinch. "You don't strike me as a woman driven by revenge." She paused. "You strike me as a woman who wants to be seen, truly seen, and remembered correctly." I felt something soften in my chest. She was right. I didn't want to humiliate Andrew, or bankrupt Chloe, or torch the empire we built. I just wanted to stop disappearing. I wanted someone to say, she was part of it. She mattered. She was never just the tea lady. I looked at Carla. Can I keep the structure intact, but ensure I have a voice again? Carla smiled faintly. You could make your co-signature required on any disbursements. You could freeze any trust payouts until your terms are honored. You could request an audit. You could reassign seats on the board, or simply make one. One what? I asked. A move. She leaned in slightly. Any move. I thought about that, about all the dinners where they talked over me, about Chloe handing me folded laundry like I was the help, about the funeral where no one said my name, about the garden I once designed being renamed after their daughter. I didn't want to burn the house down. I wanted to unlock the front door and remind them who held the key. I'll need time, I said. Carla nodded. Take it, but don't take too long. People like Chloe. They read silence as surrender. I walked her out. Before she stepped into her car, she turned back. Loretta, just so you know, Malcolm never made a major decision without you. I sat in on 100 meetings. He never raised his pen until he'd seen your face. I didn't reply, just watched her drive away, the late afternoon sun catching the metal of her mirror as she turned the corner. Inside, I didn't cry, but I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the steam rising from my tea. The sugar still wouldn't dissolve. That night, I slept with the folder on my nightstand. Not because I was afraid they'd take it, but because for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I had to vanish. I noticed the silence before I saw the envelope. No engine idling in the driveway. No warm voice saying, "Morning, Mrs. Hawkins." Just a folded note wedged under my teacup on the kitchen counter. From Chloe. Given current costs, we've decided to let Gregory go. We're modernizing transportation protocols and using a rideshare service when needed. Thank you for understanding. No signature. Just corporate coldness pretending to be polite. Gregory, 30 years behind the wheel. He'd driven Malcolm and me to every gala, hospital, graduation, and even the late-night ice cream runs when Andrew was little and couldn't sleep. He knew the mileage between every house, every florist Malcolm ever favored, every place I'd ever gone to weep privately. And now, just gone. Because of protocols. I stepped outside. It was raining softly. The kind that made everything glisten but soaked you just enough to sting. And there he was, standing by the iron gates, his cap in one hand, the keys in the other. His old brown coat looked heavier than usual. He turned when he saw me, straightened up like he still worked here. "Mrs. Hawkins," he nodded, voice low. Didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. I swallowed. Chloe told me through a note. He offered a thin smile. I figured. He didn't say anything else, didn't complain, didn't ask for fairness, just stood there like the last pillar in a house everyone else had forgotten to maintain. "Where will you go?" I asked. "I've got a niece in Vermont. Says she can use help around the property. Might be nice to see snow again." He looked at me then, properly, eyes kind, but wet too, not from the rain. "I stayed this long because of you, ma'am." He paused. "Everyone thinks it was Malcolm I admired. But it was always you. The way you remembered my wife's birthday. The way you sat in the back seat and never once made me feel like the help." Something in me cracked. Maybe the last thing still holding me together politely. I reached into my coat pocket. It had been there since Malcolm's death, wrapped carefully in tissue. His handkerchief, the ivory one with the stitched MLH, still carrying the faintest trace of his cologne. I handed it to Gregory. His hands trembled. "You sure?" I nodded. He carried it every day, so you'd be carrying part of him too. He held it against his chest for a moment, then placed it carefully in his inside pocket. No words. Just a shared silence that meant more than anything else. "I won't forget this family," he said, stepping toward the gate. "But, mostly, I won't forget you." Then he opened the door to his aging sedan, the one he never let the estate pay for, and drove off, disappearing into the misting gray. I stood in the rain longer than I needed to, not because I hoped he'd turn back, but because for the first time in days, I let myself grieve. Not loudly, just a quiet, steady ache that ran down my cheeks, indistinguishable from the rain. Gregory was the last person in this house who remembered me before I was old, before I became invisible. He'd seen me cry when Malcolm had his heart surgery. He'd made jokes to distract me when Andrew left for college. He'd once driven through a blizzard because I had a craving for apple butter from a little shop 3 towns over. People like Chloe saw him as an expense, but to me, he had always been continuity, a witness to the kind of love and loyalty that didn't need spotlights. I walked back inside, dripping, took off my shoes at the door like Gregory always did, and for the first time, I opened the old photo album on the hallway bookshelf. There he was, standing beside Malcolm at Andrew's high school graduation, behind me at the anniversary dinner, beside our Christmas tree, holding a tray of eggnog like he belonged, because he did. They may have fired Gregory, but they couldn't erase him, not from memory, and certainly not from me. It began with a bounced check. Not mine, Lily's. She texted me after class, confused and a little embarrassed. "Grandma, the bursar's office said my tuition payment didn't go through. I thought we had it covered through the family trust." We had. I remembered clearly. Malcolm had made it a point. The Hawkins Family Education Fund was established for that exact reason. No Hawkins child should ever carry student debt, he'd declared. And now the account was empty. I sat in the garden house's study, cold, creeping in through the window panes. It had rained all night, and the air smelled like wet paper. I pulled the file folder from the locked drawer in the side cabinet, the only drawer Chloe hadn't cleared out when she reorganized my personal space. Inside were my trustee credentials. I hadn't touched them since Malcolm died, hadn't needed to. But now I accessed the portal, still had the login, still had the clearance, still his name next to mine on the digital watermark. At first, the numbers didn't make sense. The balance was a third of what it had been 18 months ago. Then I saw the withdrawals. Large, regular, labeled vaguely, administrative disbursement, asset reallocation, temporary liquidity advance. One entry was flagged in red, $1.8 million, transferred to a holding company. The name jumped out at me, C&L Aspen Holdings, LLC. I felt my stomach drop. Chloe and Andrew had mentioned a ski retreat in Aspen last fall, had posted photos on social media with hashtags like elevated living and legacy retreat. I clicked deeper. Property, deed. Luxury estate, 5 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling glass, private helipad, paid in full, in cash. The Hawkins Education Fund had paid for it. Lily's tuition fund had bought her parents a ski lodge. I stood up, heart racing, and reached for the printer. One page, then another. Bank wires. Legal titles, a PR press kit. The Chloe Foundation, empowering urban youth through art. They'd used the trust to fund a fake charity designed entirely around photo ops and glossy brochures. The entire campaign was a facade. Andrew's smiling face on the cover, Chloe's voice in the foreword. Giving back is our family's most sacred value. My hands trembled as I printed everything, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood. This hadn't been a slow slipping away. This had been a dismantling, a theft, not just of money, but of legacy, of honor, of the very soul of what Malcolm and I had built. I found Lily's entry in the ledger. Her name, her scholarship line. Account closed. Funds rerouted. They'd taken even that. The quiet promise we'd made to our granddaughter. I stacked the papers neatly, one by one, made a duplicate set. Then I walked over to the old cedar chest by the fireplace, pulled out Malcolm's leather binder, the one he'd used for all his personal correspondences. I placed the folder inside. Then I sat back down. The rain had started again, slow, steady, cleansing. I didn't cry. There were no tears left for this. Only a deep stillness, a kind of resolve that doesn't arrive with thunder, but creeps in like fog, cool and quiet and absolute. They thought I was too soft, too old, too far removed to understand spreadsheets and shells, asset reallocations, and dummy corporations. But I'd sat through every board meeting for 3 decades, read every footnote Malcolm scribbled in the margins, took notes when he thought I wasn't listening. I was always listening. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because I was done waiting. They had used my silence as permission, mistook my stillness for surrender. I ran my hand over the last page, the trust bylaws. Section 7.4. In cases of breach, abuse, or misrepresentation, any standing trustee has unilateral authority to initiate dissolution proceedings and asset recall. I smiled, not in triumph, but in quiet clarity. In the mirror across the room, I didn't see a woman past her prime. I saw a widow who still carried the spine of an empire, a mother, a grandmother, a guardian of memory. The misuse of trust had only one consequence: reclamation. The house was quiet, not the kind of quiet that follows a storm, but the kind that stretches between breaths, where everything stills. I had just finished making Lily her favorite chamomile tea. She liked it with a spoonful of honey and a dash of lemon. We sat on the garden porch, wrapped in blankets, the kind Malcolm and I used to keep in the cedar chest. She had her legs tucked underneath her, curled up, like she used to do as a child. It had been a long day. Her face looked tired in the porch light, but her eyes still held that honest sparkle. She took a sip of tea, then looked at me. There was hesitation. I recognized it, the prelude to a question that had weight. "Grandma," she asked, her voice soft but pointed, "does it make you sad when people treat you like you're just old furniture?" My hand stilled on my cup. Old furniture. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to understand. "I mean," she added quickly, "like something you keep around because it's always been there, but you never really see it anymore." I looked at her, at this child who had once climbed into my lap, with scraped knees and dreams about being an astronaut. Now she was asking me if I knew what it felt like to be invisible. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. That soft chestnut wave, so much like her mother's before time and sharpness, hardened Chloe's eyes. Lily leaned into my touch, still warm, still tender. I smiled gently, though inside, something cracked. The kind of crack that doesn't make a sound, but lets light through. We sat there for a while, watching the shadows move across the lawn. She told me about her film project, how she wanted to document forgotten voices, the elderly, the overlooked, the ones who had lived but were no longer listened to. She didn't realize the irony. Or maybe she did. When she finally went upstairs to sleep, I stayed outside. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of soil and memory. I thought about her question. Old furniture. I'd been many things in my life. Wife, mother, fundraiser, caretaker, Malcolm C. silent co-architect. And now, to them, a chair in the corner, still polished, still standing, but expected to stay still. Lily's question wasn't a stab. It was a mirror, and the reflection it offered wasn't kind, but it was true. I rose, walked back into the house, and climbed the stairs to my bedroom. In the hallway, I passed the photo of Malcolm shaking hands with a senator. The plaque below it read, "For Vision and Stewardship." I traced the frame with my finger. I knew what I had to do, not out of vengeance, not out of anger, but because silence, too long kept, becomes a burial ground. I sat down at my desk, opened the drawer, removed the second copy of the trust documentation I'd printed. I placed it into a cream envelope, wrote one word across the front in cursive, contingency. Then I opened another drawer, the one with the embossed stationery, the one I hadn't touched since Malcolm's funeral. I began writing, to Lily, to the board, to Carla, to the bank. Each letter carried a seed, not to destroy, but to reset, to reclaim. I wrote through the night. By morning, the stack was neat, sealed, ready. I looked at the reflection of myself in the mirror across the room, a woman not fading, but forming. Lily had asked me if I was sad to be treated like a relic. No, I was not sad. I was awake. And tomorrow, so would they be. 3 days after Lily's question, the phone rang. Not the house line, not even my cell phone. It was the dusty cordless tucked inside the antique drawer of Malcolm's old desk, the one no one remembered existed, except for people who used to matter. I answered. Mrs. Hawkins? The voice was hesitant. Male. I wasn't sure this number still worked. I keep it for people who don't want to be found by Google, I replied quietly. A pause. It's Dennis Galloway. I used to be in accounting, for the trust. The name stirred something. Yes, Dennis. Quiet, always with a black notepad and trembling hands. He'd resigned 5 years ago, citing personal reasons, back when Malcolm was still sharp. I wasn't sure if I should call you, he said, but after what I heard, I thought maybe you should know. I sat down slowly, as if instinctively bracing myself, the kind of sit that prepares a body for impact. Go ahead, Dennis. He took a breath. I was going through old files, cleaning up. My wife says I hoard too many paper trails. He gave a nervous chuckle. But I found something off from years back. Chloe made a transfer from the auxiliary fund, about $280,000, marked under your name, supposedly for a community outreach program. And was it? I asked softly. No, ma'am. His voice dropped. It went into a shell account, then toward, well, her spa franchise in Denver. I closed my eyes, not from surprise, but from recognition. And you're sure my name was on the paperwork? Yes, but forged. It wasn't even your usual signature. I didn't catch it then. I was too afraid of Chloe. She ran everything so tightly. I could hear him swallowing guilt through the line. I don't want anything, Mrs. Hawkins. I just wanted to clear my conscience. I should have said something earlier. Before things changed. There was a stillness between us, one that held the weight of complicity and the echo of delayed courage. Thank you, Dennis, I said, my voice even. I'm glad you called. Another pause. You were always kind, he said, and I never forgot how you used to leave coffee for the night shift. I hope you make things right, ma'am. However that looks. He hung up. I didn't move, didn't rush to tell anyone, didn't gasp or rage. Instead, I opened the middle drawer of my desk, took out the expanding folder labeled Trust Irregularities. Inside were the printed reports, the statements, the letters, everything Carla had helped me quietly compile. I found the page labeled Personal Misuse Suspicion. I clicked my pen and wrote one more line. August 28th. Accountant Dennis G. confirms transfer under forged signature by C. Hawkins. Evidence pending. Then I closed the file. There was no satisfaction in it, no moment of triumph, just another stitch in a fabric they never thought I still held. Sometimes, justice doesn't knock loudly. It whispers. Through the voice of a quiet man holding onto paper trails she once thought meant nothing. But they meant everything. Later that evening, as the wind rustled through the oak trees outside, I made myself a cup of mint tea. Malcolm always said it calmed the nerves, though I never told him it reminded me of funerals. I stared out the window and whispered to the night, "Let the truth be slow, but unrelenting." Because some stories don't need to scream to be heard. Last Christmas, I had everything wrapped by the second week of December. I'd labeled each gift with careful cursive. To Lily, from Grandma. To Thomas, with love. Even Chloe had a box of monogrammed silk scarves I'd had imported from France. I still believed in grace, even when it wasn't returned. The fireplace was lit, crackling softly. My favorite Bing Crosby record played in the background. The stockings, crocheted by my own mother decades ago, hung on the mantel, their seams worn but faithful. I baked gingerbread that day. The smell filled every room, and for a moment, I almost believed I'd hear the doorbell ring, followed by the sound of Lily's excited voice shouting, "Grandma, we're here!" But instead, my phone buzzed. It was Andrew. The message was short. "Don't come this year, Mom. The kids are traveling with Chloe's side. We'll catch up after New Year's." That was it. No, love you. No, hope you understand. Just logistics. Like I was an afterthought in the itinerary of someone else's family. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I read it again and again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something softer. I didn't cry. Tears felt too obvious for something this quiet. Instead, I turned off the record player, picked up each wrapped gift, and placed them gently into the cedar chest Malcolm had built when Lily was born. One by one. The scarf box went on top. I closed the lid and locked it. The fire crackled on. I didn't bother to add another log. Later that night, I received a group photo from Chloe's Instagram. Her side of the family stood in front of a massive ski lodge in Vermont, everyone in matching Christmas pajamas, holding champagne glasses. Lily wasn't smiling. Or maybe I imagined that part. I didn't like the post. The next morning, I made myself oatmeal, sat in Malcolm's old leather chair, looked out the window at the frozen garden. The hydrangeas had long given up their blooms. Christmas came and went. No calls, no visits, not even a belated card. And so, I did the only thing left to do. I began writing letters. Not to them, but to myself. To remember who I was, who I had been before I became someone's forgotten holiday. I wrote about the first Christmas Malcolm gave me a garnet brooch and danced with me barefoot in the snow. I wrote about the year Lily was 5 and unwrapped a book instead of a toy, then spent the whole day reading in my lap. I wrote about the gingerbread recipe passed down from my grandmother, the one that never needed frosting because it stood tall on its own. I filled pages with memories that couldn't be edited or cropped. And in the quiet, I found something more enduring than wrapping paper and bows. I found resolve. Because sometimes the deepest betrayals aren't loud. They're not shouted in anger or scribbled in legal ink. They arrive in silence, in the message that says, "Don't come," in the gift never opened, in the love deemed inconvenient. When I finally rose from the chair, my tea had gone cold, but my heart, strangely, had not. That night, I took the key from around my neck, unlocked the cedar chest, and removed one gift. A thick novel wrapped in gold paper, labeled, "To Lily." I placed it in a drawer beside my bed. One day, I'd give it to her myself, when she was old enough to ask questions and brave enough to hear the answers. The rest of the gifts stayed locked away, not out of spite, but preservation. Because not every memory needs to be burned. Some deserve a vault. Until time softens the betrayal enough to let them breathe again. I didn't wait for the new year to act. Carla and I met again. This time not at my home, but at her office downtown. She wore a gray wool coat, buttoned neatly, her briefcase already open before I even sat down. "I filed the petition for dissolution this morning," she said, sliding the document toward me. Her voice was clean, professional, but I could hear the respect in it. She still called me Mrs. Hawkins. I took the document in my hand. Petition for judicial dissolution of the Hawkins family trust. There it was. Years of sacrifice, stripped down to legal ink and intent. Is it too late to change my mind? I asked quietly. She smiled, softly, not condescendingly. You've changed your mind before, but I don't think this is one of those times. She was right. I signed. It was the kind of pen stroke that doesn't make noise, but still echoes. Back home, I brewed myself a fresh pot of tea. Jasmine, the kind Malcolm loved. I sipped slowly while reviewing the second file Carla had prepared, one I'd requested personally. This one wasn't for the court. This one was for control. For years, I'd allowed Andrew quiet authority over operations, charity disbursements, property management, investment decisions. Not because I trusted him fully, but because I wanted to. Because it was easier to believe he was still the boy who cried over lost baseball games and called me from college just to say he missed me. I had given him the power, silently. But silence, I learned, could be misused more dangerously than shouting. Now, every clause of that silent trust had been documented, identified by Carla and her team. There were 19 separate instruments of delegation, 19. And by the time the clock struck 6 p.m., all 19 were gone, revoked, rescinded, erased. My signature again. No flourish, no hesitation. Carla sent the notifications to the appropriate entities. Not a single copy went to Andrew. He would find out when he tried to access what was no longer his. That evening, I met with Helen Marshall, the estate's longest-serving manager. 62 years old, 2 decades of loyal service, and a memory as sharp as cut glass. We sat across from each other at the long mahogany table Malcolm once used for board meetings. Helen, I said, how would you feel about becoming the new operating trustee of the Hawkins Foundation, temporarily? Her lips parted in disbelief. Ma'am, I'm honored. But are you sure? I've never been more certain. She nodded, eyes glassy. You're taking it back. No, I replied gently. I'm giving it forward to someone who understands what stewardship means. I handed her the official letter of appointment. Carla had drafted it with meticulous precision. Helen would have authority, not Andrew, not Chloe, not any of their hand-picked advisors or PR consultants. Just her. Someone who had seen this family's rise, and now, quietly, it's unraveling. I didn't inform Andrew. I didn't call. I didn't write. I didn't warn. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I'd already been hurt. Too many times, I had softened consequences with kindness, wrapped disappointment in forgiveness, convinced myself that silence was dignity. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about stewardship, legacy. And my legacy was not theirs to drain and brand and dress in false charity. I stepped outside to the garden as twilight dipped the sky in gray and copper. The trees were bare, winter resting in their limbs. The wind carried the scent of cold soil and old memories. I stood beneath the oak Malcolm had planted the year Andrew was born, its bark rough with age, its branches still stretching, still holding on. I placed my palm against it and whispered, "It's done." Not out of triumph, but closure. Not because I won, but because I stopped losing. This was the beginning of the end, and the beginning of something else entirely. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. A cream-colored envelope with our family crest, embossed in gold. The kind of formal stationery we used back when things still felt sacred, when holidays meant handwritten menus, polished silver, and laughter that echoed off the high ceilings of our family home. My name was written in Andrew's handwriting, still neat, still deliberate. Mrs. Loretta Hawkins. Not mom, not mother, just formality wrapped in nostalgia. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling more than I'd like to admit. Inside was a folded card. Thick, textured, expensive. You are cordially invited to the Hawkins family Thanksgiving dinner. It read. Date. Time. Dress code. Formal. Location. The estate. The estate I once ruled. The estate they now walked through like royalty, as if they'd inherited the soul of something they'd only ever drained. I read the invitation twice. Then again. And then I saw it. Tucked beneath the card was a handwritten note. Not from Andrew. It was Chloe's penmanship, flowing and perfumed. Family is everything, isn't it, Mom? I stared at that sentence. 7 words that said nothing but meant everything. A flick of a blade disguised as sentiment. Mockery in cursive. She was playing her game again, drawing me back in, dangling false kindness like a carrot. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Still, I did not tear it up. Instead, I stood and walked it over to the kitchen table where I'd laid out Carla's final file. The one with every documented misuse. The one we'd both agreed would only be used if absolutely necessary. I placed the invitation on top, for contrast, for irony. That evening, I walked out into the garden. The air was colder now, sharp with November's breath. I found myself standing by the bench under the dogwood tree, the one Malcolm built when we first bought the estate. I sat down slowly, the wooden slats creaking beneath me. I thought of every Thanksgiving past, of stuffing recipes I memorized without ever needing to look them up, of grandkids sneaking extra pie when they thought I wasn't watching, of Andrew falling asleep on the couch mid-football game with Lily curled against his chest. And now, this. A formal invite, a perfumed note, a performance. Family is everything, Chloe had written. And yet, last Christmas, I was told not to come. And yet, Lily's college fund had been siphoned dry. And yet, they'd used my name, to funnel money into false charities and Aspen estates. Family, it seemed, was everything only when it was convenient. I sat there until the moon carved shadows across the lawn, thinking. Not bitter, just awake. Eventually, I stood, brushed the frost from my coat, and walked back inside. I went to the bedroom closet and pulled down a small box from the top shelf. Inside, it was the brooch Malcolm gave me for our 25th anniversary. A silver maple leaf with emerald veins, delicate and strong. I hadn't worn it in years, but this year, I would. I fastened it to the collar of my coat and whispered to myself, the last Thanksgiving. Because that's what it would be, not the last holiday, not the last dinner, but the last time I would sit at their table pretending not to see the rot beneath the linens. I called Carla the next morning. I received an invitation, I said. There was a pause on the line, as if she knew exactly what kind. I'll be going, I continued, but only to observe, not to engage. And if something happens? She asked. I smiled. I won't be the one who starts it. She chuckled. But you'll be ready if they do. Exactly. After the call, I went back to my desk. I picked up Chloe's note again, read it one last time. Family is everything, isn't it, Mom? I placed it back in the envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into the side pocket of my purse. Not because I needed a reminder, but because sometimes irony deserves a front row seat. The dining room was glowing with candlelight and curated charm. Chloe had spared no detail. Silver chargers, gold-rimmed china, napkin rings shaped like autumn leaves. A soft string quartet played in the background, piped in through hidden speakers. The entire evening was a production, one that screamed wealth, taste, and control. I sat at the far end of the table, across from Andrew and Chloe, between Lily and a cousin I barely recognized. They didn't offer me the seat of honor. That had gone to Chloe's mother, who wore it like a crown. Dinner was served with rehearsed smiles and hollow conversation. Andrew gave a short speech about gratitude and legacy. Chloe raised her glass and toasted to family and the future. Everyone clapped. Everyone except me. I smiled quietly, my hands folded over my lap, the envelope resting just inside my purse like a loaded chamber. It wasn't time. Not yet. The turkey was carved. The wine poured. The children whispered under their breaths, bored and restless. I passed the mashed potatoes, nodded politely when spoken to, laughed when expected. But my eyes were calculating, tracing every crack in their porcelain act. Then came dessert. Pumpkin chiffon pie, 3 layers, topped with handmade whipped cream and candied pecans. Chloe stood and lifted her glass again. "And finally," she said, smiling toward me, "we want to thank Mother Loretta for joining us this year. It truly means something, despite the past." A few heads tilted. She turned fully toward me now. Although, let's be honest, this family has changed. We're building something new, a new kind of tradition. She reached for Andrew's hand and squeezed it. "And sometimes, in order to grow," she said sweetly, "we have to accept that certain chapters close. Some people simply don't fit into the next version of our lives." The room went silent. My heart did not race. I simply reached into my purse. She continued, oblivious. "So, while we love and respect the role you used to play, Mother, it's important you understand that I am no longer a part of this family." I finished for her. Chloe blinked. Andrew stared. Forks froze mid-air. "Yes," she said, recovering. "That's a mature way to put it." I stood, pulled the envelope from my bag. "I thought you might say that," I said. I walked over and gently placed it next to Chloe's dessert plate. "What is this?" she asked, her tone suddenly unsure. "Read it." She looked at Andrew, who shrugged and opened the envelope. Inside, full documentation of the misuse of funds, withdrawal records from Lily's college account, the accountant's signed affidavit, evidence of Chloe's fraudulent transfers under my name, Carla's official motion to dissolve the foundation, revocation of all power of attorney and financial access. Chloe's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Andrew paled. You wouldn't," he stammered. "Oh, I already did," I replied. Across the table, Lily leaned forward, her brows furrowed. "What's happening?" No one answered her. Chloe hissed under her breath. "You think this will hurt us?" "No," I said calmly. "I think it will end you. Financially, at least." "You can't prove." "I don't have to," I interrupted. "It's all in the file. I simply gave you the courtesy of reading it before the rest of the world does." I turned to leave, but paused. "One more thing," I said. I looked around the table, at cousins who once played tag in my garden, at grandchildren who no longer visited unless coerced. This will be my last holiday here. I won't return, not for Christmas, not for anything. I let that land. "But don't worry," I added, voice even softer. I've arranged for all ongoing support to end gradually. I wouldn't want you to feel abandoned. With that, I turned and walked out. Not rushed, not dramatic, just done. Behind me, silence, the kind that wraps around a family like fog when truth finally settles. As I reached the front door, I heard the clatter of a fork dropping, then the sound of someone standing up. I didn't turn back. I stepped outside into the cold air and smiled to myself. Let them eat pie. Their luxury ended with a dessert. The sun rose slowly the next morning, indifferent to everything that had unraveled the night before. I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, wrapped in my navy robe, slippers barely touching the floor. Outside, frost dusted the edges of the rose bushes. The silence inside the house was thick. But for once, it wasn't lonely. It was earned. My phone was face down on the table. I hadn't touched it since coming home. When I finally turned it over, there were 18 missed calls, all from Andrew and Chloe. Some were just seconds apart. I didn't listen to the voicemails. Not yet. I just sat with the quiet. After 40 years of being the fixer, the listener, the soother, the backup plan, the bank, this silence felt unfamiliar, sharp, still, and powerful. The first voicemail came from Chloe, her voice already cracking. "Loretta, please call me. You don't understand what this could do to our family, to the kids, to Andrew. Please, don't do this." I deleted it. The next one was Andrew. "Mom, pick up the phone. What the hell is this? Are you really trying to ruin our lives over a misunderstanding? Call me back, now." Delete. Another one. Chloe again. Now sobbing. "I didn't mean it. Not like that. We were trying to protect boundaries. That's all. You know I've always respected you. Please, don't do anything drastic." Delete. Then Andrew again. This time yelling. "You've lost your damn mind. You're letting that lawyer manipulate you. You think you're punishing us, but you're destroying everything. Grow up, Mom." Delete. Another. Just the sound of breathing. Then, "I'm sorry," in a whisper. I let that one sit for a moment. Then I pressed delete. By 10 a.m., my phone lit up again. Text after text. Paragraphs. Photos of the kids. A forwarded video of Lily performing a Thanksgiving song from school. I watched none of it. I didn't need proof that they remembered how to pretend. What I needed was space to remember myself. This was the first time in 4 decades that I heard the sound of my own silence, clean, unedited, uninterrupted by need or guilt or obligation. I didn't realize how many versions of myself had been compromised over the years, how many birthdays I spent alone so they could vacation, how many checks I wrote instead of saying no, how often I swallowed hurt so the family wouldn't fracture. But last night, something shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was awakening. I watched the steam rise from my tea and imagined it carrying away every apology I was ever forced to make just to keep the peace. The phone rang again. I turned it over without looking. Let it ring out. I was no longer a mother on standby, no longer the cushion they fell on when choices caught up with them, no longer the ghost at their table, funding the feast but never welcome to sit. I was Loretta, daughter of a librarian and a carpenter, widow of Thomas Whitmore, Nana to Lily. Quiet survivor of more betrayals than I could count, and I had finally stopped waiting to be invited. At 11:15, Carla texted, "Just saw the media release. You did it. Everything's clean. Let me know when you're ready for the next step." I smiled, replied simply, "Let's wait a few days. I want to listen to the quiet a little longer." I went to the kitchen, pulled out a small notepad, and wrote a grocery list. I was low on olive oil, needed fresh rosemary. Maybe I'd make a lemon pound cake. The landline rang, an actual call, not a notification, not a buzzing, the sound of a real connection request. I let it ring, then walked over and picked up. Hello? Silence. Then a click. I hung up, didn't flinch, didn't feel anything except a small wave of calm. This silence wasn't empty. It was full of every version of me I had once muted to survive. And now each one of them was gently rising. I breathed in, held it, released. And in that breath, I decided. This was the voice I had been waiting to hear for 40 years. My own. The conference room was colder than usual that morning, despite the late November sun warming the glass windows. I sat at the long oak table in a gray wool coat, hands folded, silent. To my right sat Carla, unshaken, sharp in her navy suit, fingers drumming lightly against a stack of papers. Across from us, Andrew's attorney looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was loose, his expression pinched, and behind him stood an assistant clutching a leather briefcase like it held holy scripture. He cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitmore, Ms. Dalton, thank you for agreeing to meet. I said nothing. Carla gave a small nod. I'll get straight to it, he continued. My clients regret that tensions escalated during the holiday. Emotions were high. But surely, we can agree that it's in everyone's best interest to avoid unnecessary litigation. Carla smiled without warmth. Your clients withdrew $314,000 over the past 14 months, funneling it through unauthorized wire transfers, expenses for travel and home renovations, and 3 accounts tied to shell LLCs. We have all the records. He shifted uncomfortably. Andrew was under the impression he had financial authority. His mother never signed durable power of attorney, Carla interrupted. And even if she had, abusing access for personal enrichment, especially from an elderly parent, falls under financial exploitation in the state of Virginia, which carries a Class 1 felony charge. He glanced at me, then looked back to Carla. What exactly are you asking for? Carla slid the papers across the table. Full restitution. All misappropriated funds repaid in full within 30 days. And a signed agreement that relinquishes any claim Andrew or Chloe may have over Mrs. Whitmore's estate, foundation assets, or holdings, past, present, or future. He blinked. That's aggressive. No, Carla said, her voice quiet but steady. It's mercy. I watched him wrestle with the reality. I didn't need to speak. I had already said enough by showing up. He looked down at the documents, then up again. What happens if we decline? Carla didn't flinch. Then we proceed with formal litigation. The petition is ready to file. Charges will include financial abuse of an elderly person, falsification of legal authority, and fraudulent misrepresentation to financial institutions. We'll also notify the IRS. The assistant behind him paled. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. You'd really drag your own son through court? Carla looked at me briefly, then back to him. Her son made that choice when he decided her worth ended with her bank balance. I leaned forward slightly, my voice level and composed. You're asking if I want this. I don't. But that's irrelevant now. He stared at me. I folded my hands again. What I want is peace. What I deserve is respect. What I've been given is betrayal, served with wine at a holiday table I paid for, in a house I built, while being told I no longer belonged. Silence settled over the room. Then I added, still calm. It's not that I've cut them off from the estate. It's that they already cut themselves off from me. He looked down again. This time, he didn't speak for a long while. Eventually, he nodded. I'll present this to them. You'll have a response by end of week. Carla stood. We'll wait, but not forever. We left the papers behind and walked out. The hallway outside was bright, quiet, almost too clean. As we reached the elevator, Carla turned to me. You did well in there. I didn't say much, I replied. She gave me a soft smile. Exactly. We stood in silence as the elevator descended. In my purse was a folded photo of Andrew at age 5, in overalls and a paper crown, frosting on his nose as he blew out candles. It had fallen from an old drawer 2 nights ago. I didn't know why I brought it today. Maybe to remind myself who I had loved and who I was finally letting go of. When we stepped out into the cold air, I pulled my coat tighter. The wind didn't sting. It cleared. It arrived 3 days after the meeting with the lawyers. A small, cream-colored envelope, tucked between junk mail and a catalog for garden seeds I hadn't ordered. The handwriting on the front stopped me. It was loopy, with a heart over the I in Grandma. Lily. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, keys still in my hand, scarf barely untied, before I stepped into the kitchen and sat down. The kettle hissed in the background. I didn't touch it. I opened the letter slowly. My hands trembled. Not out of fear, but something older, deeper. Hope, perhaps. Or grief that had nowhere left to sit. Dear Grandma, I don't know if this letter will fix anything. I just need to say this. I'm sorry for not speaking up, for not hugging you that day, for pretending like I didn't see your face when Mom said what she said. I saw everything. I've always known who really held this family together. It wasn't the holiday meals or the fancy dinners. It was you, your presence, your gentle questions, your laugh when you thought no one was listening. Mom and Dad are furious right now. They say you're being dramatic. But I don't think so. I think you're being, finally, honest. And I want you to know, I choose you. I always have. Even if I didn't say it out loud before. Love, Lily. I don't remember the moment the tears started, only that they came without resistance. Quiet and full, pooling beneath my chin and onto the pale yellow tablecloth I'd embroidered the year Lily was born. It was the first time I'd cried since Harold's funeral. Not when they took my place at the table. Not when I packed the gifts back into the cupboard last Christmas. Not even when Andrew stared at me as if I were something expired, something he could outgrow. But now I wept like a woman who'd been holding her breath for years and had finally exhaled. I carried her letter into the living room and sat by the fire. The sun had begun to set behind the backyard trees, spilling orange, streaks across the carpet. I thought about Lily's ballet recitals, the way she used to crawl into my lap after falling on the playground, how she'd once asked, "Grandma, will I still be your favorite when I'm 30?" I smiled at the memory. And then I wrote back, "Dear Lily, you don't have to fix anything. You already have. Your words meant more than I can say. This past year has been quiet, in a painful way, like walking through a house where all the furniture is still there, but the warmth is gone. But you, my sweet girl, you reminded me of something. That love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through letters and small rebellions. I don't need everyone to understand. I don't need apologies wrapped in excuses. I just need the truth. And you gave me that. You are the reason I don't regret standing up. You are the reason I can let go, without bitterness. And no matter what happens next, know this. You are still my favorite. Always have been. Always will be. With all my heart, Grandma. I sealed the envelope and walked it to the mailbox myself. No snow yet, just brittle air and leaves crunching underfoot. When I raised the flag on the box, I felt something shift in me. Not everything had to end to begin again. Later that night, I sat in my chair by the window, sipping tea and watching the stars blink into view. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like space. Space for something gentle to grow. Space for me. I moved into the cottage on the last Thursday of March, a real one. White shutters, cedar shingles, and climbing roses that hadn't bloomed yet but promised to. It sat quietly at the edge of a bluff in Camden, Maine, where the sea spoke in soft rhythms, and the mornings began not with shouting or footsteps, but with birdsong. The realtors had called it a modest coastal home with character. I called it peace. I bought it with my own money. Money Andrew once thought was his by inheritance, by birthright, by arrogance. He was wrong. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. For decades, I gave everything I had. Time, labor, emotional labor, understanding, silence. But now I gave myself something back. A garden, a kettle that whistled for no one else, a key that opened a door where only love entered. There were no family portraits here, no forced smiles from holiday dinners, no passive-aggressive sticky notes, no sounds of someone muttering, "She's too much," when they thought I couldn't hear. Here, there was wind and waves and birds that didn't care what anyone thought of them. My days settled into something soft. I watered geraniums in the morning, wrapped myself in a wool shawl by afternoon, and baked lemon shortbread when the craving struck. Every evening, I lit a single candle by the window, not because I was waiting for someone, but because it made me feel warm, present, alive. Lily came by the first Sunday of every month, no matter what. Sometimes she brought a book to read by the fireplace. Sometimes she brought questions, real ones. What made you fall in love with Grandpa? Or, did you always want children? She wanted to know me, not as an extension of someone else, but as a woman. We cooked together. She especially liked to crack the eggs and always made a mess, and I never once corrected her. We laughed too hard to care. Carla visited every few weeks. She never stayed long, always said she didn't want to intrude, but she always brought something warm. A cherry pie, a basket of squash, or just her company, the kind that didn't ask anything of me but to be. "You look more like yourself each time I see you," she said once, handing me a scarf she'd knitted. I believed her. I felt it. One crisp afternoon, as the leaves started turning gold, I opened my wardrobe to reach for a shawl. Nestled in the corner was a small box I hadn't noticed in months. Inside, it was a brooch, maple leaf-shaped, burnished bronze. Harold had given it to me on our 30th anniversary. I used to wear it for special occasions. But now, today was special enough. I pinned it to the side of my woolen scarf, and when I stepped outside, the wind picked up slightly, just enough to remind me I was still here. The past didn't disappear. I didn't pretend none of it happened, but it no longer sat at the head of my table. It didn't shadow every choice or weigh on every breath. I forgave, not to excuse, but to free myself from carrying their disappointments any longer. I no longer missed their voices, because the silence here wasn't empty. It was honest. There was a day I stood on the cliff's edge, watching the tide pull back, and I realized I no longer needed an apology. Not from Chloe, not from Andrew, not even from the part of me that had stayed too long in their version of love. I had rewritten the ending, not with fire or fury, but with flowers, tea, and a locked door no one could storm through. At night, I curled up with a book, or sometimes with nothing but the sound of waves. I had stopped waiting for calls, for explanations, for redemption. Instead, I had started listening to myself, to joy, to the faint sound of hope returning. And on my windowsill, there sat a tiny note Lily had left one Sunday. "This house feels like you, and you feel like home." Yes, yes, I do. I sat in the old rocking chair by the window, the sea stretching endlessly beyond the frame. It was just before dusk, the sky bathed in soft gold, the kind of light that made everything look like a memory you wanted to keep. On my lap lay a photograph. It was Malcolm, taken on our last vacation to Martha's Vineyard. His eyes twinkled the way they always did when he was about to say something cheeky, and his hand was caught mid-gesture, reaching for mine. Even in stillness, he looked alive. I traced the edge of the picture slowly, as if doing so could make time unravel. He once told me, "If they ever forget who you are, let the silence remind them." Back then, I didn't fully understand what he meant. I thought he was just being poetic again, the way he used to quote old books and write notes in the margins of mine. But now I understood it like I understood my own breath, because silence had become my strongest voice, not the kind born from defeat, not resignation, but the kind that stands tall and says, "Enough." I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to beg them to see me. They knew. Deep down, they knew. That Thanksgiving, when I placed the envelope on the table, I watched their certainty crumble. No drama, no raised voices, just facts, just lines of legal truth with my signature at the bottom and a notary seal that made it all final. The sound of Chloe's fork falling onto her plate was louder than any insult she'd ever thrown my way. In the weeks since, the phone had stopped ringing. No more missed calls, no more desperate voicemails. The silence stretched wide, but it wasn't empty. It was peaceful, liberating, and strangely, it was full of all the things I had been too afraid to claim before: dignity, space, stillness. Malcolm used to say I was the glue in this family, and I was. I held things together when they fell apart. I softened the edges, bridged the gaps, filled the silence with casseroles, apologies, and second chances. But glue doesn't last forever. Eventually, it dries out. Cracks. Let's go. The truth is, I didn't disown them. I didn't throw them away. They stepped over my love so many times it wore thin. They chipped away at my patience until I was standing there, bare, and still somehow not enough. Until finally, I stopped reaching out with hands that were always the first to be slapped away. And you know what surprised me most? How light I felt afterward. It wasn't joy. Not exactly. It was release. Like exhaling after holding your breath for decades. Like putting down a suitcase you didn't realize had been chained to your wrist. Lily came last weekend with a bouquet of tulips. She didn't say much, just sat with me and held my hand. That's the thing about real love. It doesn't ask you to prove anything. She didn't ask for the full story. She knew enough, and that was enough for me. Carla mailed me a recipe card yesterday, her mother's famous pecan pie. She said, just in case Thanksgiving ever looks different again. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But either way, I'll be okay. The wind rattled gently at the window. I looked down again at Malcolm's photo and smiled. You always saw it before I did. I whispered. You always knew I was worth more than what they reduced me to. Then I looked back out at the sea, the horizon glowing like it had secrets to keep. And for the first time in years, I didn't ache. I didn't wonder what if. I didn't wish to rewrite the past. There was no anger left, only light and a quiet kind of strength that doesn't announce itself but changes everything. So now I'll ask you, yes, you who's listening, do you think I was wrong? If you were in my place, would you have done the same? Would you have walked away? Or would you have stayed, knowing every step forward cost you a little more of your soul? I don't need an answer, but if you have one, leave it below. Let's talk. Let's connect. Because I think stories like mine aren't as rare as people pretend they are. And maybe, just maybe, your silence deserves to be heard, too.